you see what happens if you get an honorary degree. You have to do the address also, so be careful for what you wish. Well, yeah, it's a great-looking group here today. I'd like to thank Principal Suzanne Fortier and Chancellor Arnold Steinberg and the Chair of the Board of Governors, Kip Colbert. Caroline and I are really, truly humbled and honored to be here today. And I'm not just saying that, it's true. We'd like to thank the faculties that are here, board and alumni present today, as well as our wonderful family and friends who are sitting up in one of the loges there. Now, I can share with you, when we first told our 5 children we would be receiving honorary doctorates in science, our youngest, who's just 11, looked up at us and said, "Do they know at McGill, and have you told them, I have to help you run your iPads and your iPhones?" So as parents, Carolina and I want to especially thank the parents and the loved ones of all of you guys who supported you with care packages and money and encouragement, and we really want to thank them today. But lastly and most importantly, let's honor and congratulate the class of 2013. Now, class of 2013, you're graduating from a university that's older than Canada itself. It's coming up on its 200th anniversary, formed in 1821. McGill is the most renowned international university in Canada, with 25% of all undergraduates from other countries in Canada. That's the highest in all of Canada. You also come from a long line of not just brains, but brawn. Canada's first official hockey team was the McGill Hockey Club, founded in 1882. The founder of basketball, James Naismith, graduated in 1887 from McGill, and you've been playing Harvard in rugby since 1874 and kind of invented the modern-day rules of football. Among its alumni, McGill has produced 9 Nobel Prize winners, 3 astronauts, 2 prime ministers, maybe 3, you know, Justin Trudeau graduated from here, 12 Supreme Court justices, 4 foreign leaders, 28 ambassadors, 3 Pulitzer Prize winners, 9 Academy Award winners, 28 Olympic medals, and the most Rhodes Scholars, 134 in all of Canada. Our logo of red and white is quite fitting because it was a McGill graduate from law school, Robert Stanley Weir, who wrote the words to our national anthem, O Canada. Now, I know you guys knew all this. Now, you've done all of this while being the only Canadian university named in the top 10 party schools in North America by Playboy magazine. Well done, well done, well done. Now, around this holiday season coming up, there's a classic 1946 movie written by Frank Capra called It's a Wonderful Life, and it begins to show again on television every year, and I'm sure many of you have seen it or at least heard about it. In the movie, George, who's played by Jimmy Stewart, is the main character. However, he believes his life has not been worthwhile. He's not rich or successful. He's lived in the same town all his life. He works in the same building that his father did. But he meets this angel, this older angel, who's yet to earn his wings, because to earn your wings in the film, the bell must ring from heaven before this angel gets his wings. But this angel shows George the importance of his life. He explains to him how he's an important part of the community. And in the end of the film, in conclusion, the town rallies around it. It has a very happy ending. And bang, the bell rings, and the angel gets his wings. I would like to talk to you today about how we are all like George. We are the sum collection of all our choices in life. And that's what George was. If someone were to tell me back in 1978 that I would be standing here today, I would have been astonished. Not that I'm still standing, but I never really set out to do the things that I did. And Dr. Fortier mentioned this earlier in her address. Things just kind of happened. I never set out to be a geologist either. I was the second of 5 children and raised in an Irish Catholic household in Kentucky. Neither of my parents went to university. They stressed education, though, and they stressed also we better figure out how we're going to pay for it, because we didn't have much. 4 out of the 5 of us ended up with PhDs, not bad, but I was never really as good a student as my siblings, unfortunately. I was too busy sort of doing sort of Huckleberry Finn adventures and that type of thing. And like once I skipped class in high school, or classes in high school, not that I just skipped class once, but on this one occasion, I ended up saving a boy from drowning in the local river. Well, this presented a really big problem for Sister Mary Roberts, who was a Franciscan nun who ran the school, because she had to mete out some punishment to me regardless of my valor. In my second year of university, when I was in Kentucky as an undergraduate, I bought this old junky pop machine, dispenses cans of pop, and decided I would load it with beer instead of pop, which is not that all that imaginative for an undergraduate to do that, but I lived in a dry county. The university was in a dry county, and it was a remnant of Prohibition, and things were that way back in those days. You know, it worked out pretty well. I was providing a service for the students at a reasonable cost, and following my parents' advice, paying for my education, and everything was going along pretty well. And then one night there was a knock at the door, and there were some very big gentlemen standing outside the door with baseball bats and other blunt instruments, and they turned out to be my local competitors. They were the real bootleggers. And you know, my friends and roommates and partners all beat it out the back door of our little house and left me there. And that's when I learned one of my first valuable lessons, that success has many parents and failure is almost always an orphan. So be careful for what you wish. Also, not every opportunity is necessarily a good idea. My father's usual response to all of this, and he had lots of responses, but his usual one was, "Don't tell your mother I have to sleep with her." Now, my mom, on the other hand, of course, he would always say, you know, his view of me was, well, even the blind squirrel finds the odd nut. So he figured I'd make out, but my mother had a lot of confidence in me. She was eternally optimistic about my shortcomings, and I would eventually amount to something. Of course, her idea was I would go join the priesthood, and that would be just fine. At first, I thought I wanted to be a writer, and I had a small scholarship and enrolled in journalism. Despite my literary prowess at the time, I needed to have a science course to fill out my curriculum. So one day, probably skipping class, I was watching a movie, and in this movie, there was this beautiful blonde goddess, and she was in, I think it was Brigitte Bardot, who was the actress, and she was in love and a passionate affair with a geologist. Voila! I found my science course. I quickly enrolled in the introductory course, and you know, watching that movie that afternoon inadvertently changed the course of my life. I didn't realize it at the time. I liked the course, I switched majors, and, well, the rest is kind of history. While doing my PhD, I then thought, well, I'll be a professor and a researcher. I mean, I taught 1 year at Dawson College, I lectured 1 year at McGill, so I figured I was qualified for that. So one day, one of the large oil companies, Shell Oil, was on campus recruiting engineers and geologists, and they asked to see me because they heard I had been working on something in my PhD research which was similar to something they were interested in. So they offered me a job. Oh my, now I'm at a fork in the road again. You know, I had also been offered a lectureship or an assistant teaching job at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, which at that time was a small all-women's college, which seemed pretty interesting to me. What to do? To accept Shell's offer would have put me outside my comfort zone because I was going to be a scientist and a researcher. They hired younger people, undergraduates, not PhDs, and I didn't know whether I'd be any good at finding oil. Well, while being a professor was sort of natural for me. Well, you guys kind of know where it all went. I ended up doing pretty well at Shell, found lots of oil, ended up starting other companies, and it kind of the rest is history. I just kind of finish one project, do another one, finish one project, do another one. A lot of you are sitting here today, students are sitting here today wondering what they're going to do with their degree. Where am I going to work? Who's going to hire me? If you have a job, will I be any good at it? And so forth. I'm here to tell you that question never ends. As you get older in life, I still get asked, boy, I see you sold your last company. What are you going to do next? You're going to start another company, and it just goes on and on and on. So just, you got that piece earlier today. Just be prepared for that, because it never ends. Now, my wife, Carolina, this is the really nice-looking lady right there, graduated in 1985, as Suzanne mentioned, with a science degree, and had to relocate back to Calgary. Of course, there was more to it than that. Calgary was in a terrible recession at that time. Economic downturn, layoffs, and there wasn't very many jobs. She applied to many companies and couldn't get hired. Her dad finally said to her, I know this headhunter at a firm, why don't we go see her and maybe she'll rewrite your resume and make you more employable. And Carolina said, well, it couldn't hurt. So she went to see this lady who ran this small firm, and the lady said to her, well, why don't you come and work for me? And Carolina said, well, I don't know what you do. How do I get paid? Well, you get paid on contingency. If you place people, you get paid. If you don't get paid. Well, she decided to take the job. There were 3 other employees there. She was the most junior. She was very young. They gave her a phone book, cold call, a telephone. They sat in a bullpen, and it was awful. And all the guys smoked, and she was in there working away. And gave her a little project. Here's a geologist. Here's your speech you read when you call someone up, when you cold call them. Of course, she was the most junior, so she didn't get the senior firms, the large oil companies, which were more likely to hire. She got the small companies, the ones where the president answers the phone. And, halfway through the phone book one day, a gruff engineer, and she hated these cold calls, answered and said, and she told him about what she was representing. He says, well, I'm looking for a geologist, but he needs to find oil and quick. So she marched over with her resume of this guy, and he told her, look, I can find people like that. You've got to find somebody better than I can find, or you won't get paid. Well, he didn't know Carolina. She's persistent and very observant, and she came to the country when she was 10 years old and didn't speak either official language. She got a degree at McGill in science. She found this guy a good geologist, and guess what? She then found him another one, and then pretty soon, within months, she was matching placements with the owner of the firm. So what did she do? Well, about a year later, she went in and resigned, and her boss was astonished. She says, you're making all this money in a downturn? Are you crazy? And she said, no, I wrote my LSATs. I've been accepted to several law schools, and I want to go practice law and represent people. It's not about the money. For her, it was never really about the money. She walked away from it because she knew if she didn't, she would never go to law school. She would never do what she did. And she had this burning desire to do it. So she walked away from a successful job to do that. She came to the fork in the road. Many years later, she left the full practice of law, and this was right after winning a very major a controversial court of appeal case, and she did it to focus on raising our children, some of who were sitting up there. Be there when they came home. And she's never really looked back. And she's the one who came up with the concept Best in the West to provide scholarship funds. It wasn't my idea, it was hers. And many of the philanthropic efforts come from her. She's a real problem solver. I call her a muse. You guys know what a muse is. She's a muse. If you have something you need to get there, she's right there. Her father used to say to her, you'll never lose your education, you will just use it in another way. For her, the end of something was just the beginning of something new. Now, in summary, our experience have taught us what George learned in the movie. And I'm going to tell you this. Never compare yourself to anyone else. as you will either be very, very vain or very unhappy. Instead, set your own goals. If you're at the fork in the road, when you will be many times, disconnect yourself from Facebook and Twitter and social media. Step back and think about what it is you're going to do. Now, don't become a hermit. You have to be engaged in your opportunities. Don't be a passive observer. Now, in summary, go earn your wings, listen for the bell, and have a wonderful life. Thank you.